Inside every mouthful of feed your animals consume is a complex set of nutrients, all designed to optimize the performance and health of beef and dairy cattle. Among those nutritional components are trace minerals, nutrients required in very small amounts to support vital biological processes. Although they're measured in parts per million, trace minerals significantly impact productivity and immunity. Feedstuffs do contain trace minerals, but the concentrations of many of these minerals typically aren't high enough to meet the nutritional demands of modern animal production. That's why producers and nutritionists supplement trace minerals in beef and dairy cattle diets. There are several trace mineral options available, and they vary both in effectiveness and cost. This program will explore how different sources of trace minerals behave so you can better understand how to choose the right trace minerals for your nutritional program. Let's start with a brief overview of what trace minerals are and what they do. Trace minerals support an array of biological functions that are required for proper immune function, reproduction, and growth. The most commonly supplemented trace minerals for cattle are zinc, which contributes to making protein, vitamin A utilization, fertility, and skin health. Manganese, which contributes to healthy bone and cartilage, enzymes, immunity, and fertility. And copper, which supports bone joint health, blood cells, immunity, fertility, and proper iron metabolism.
It is necessary to supplement trace minerals in beef and dairy diets because usually there's one or more trace minerals that are deficient in the natural feed ingredients. So unless we supplement what's naturally present in the diet, we're likely to run into deficiencies. Little is known really about the actual bioavailability of most trace minerals that occur naturally in feedstuffs. There's three major sources of trace minerals that are added to diets today. One would be inorganic trace minerals. The main ones that would be added would be sulfate forms. These are water soluble, they have a very weak bond, and they tend to be converted to the ionic form very easily. On the other hand, organic trace minerals would be another category. These are trace minerals that are chemically bound through covalent bonds to either carbon groups or amino groups, and these are usually considered more bioavailable because the mineral is not being as easily converted to the ionic form. Then the third type would be the hydroxy trace minerals, which is the most recent category. This group has covalent bonds, but instead of carbon, it's with hydroxy groups in chloride. These minerals also are not water soluble, but in the acid environment of the gut, they do start becoming soluble over time and converted to a form that can be absorbed.
Trace minerals are available from different sources. The makeup and structure of a trace mineral determines how it reacts in the feed, during digestion, and ultimately how much of the mineral will be available to the animal for absorption. Trace mineral sources are distinguished by the substance the mineral is bound to. This substance is called the ligand. If the bond to the ligand is too strong, the trace mineral can't be separated from it, and the animal will be unable to absorb it. If the bond is too weak, the mineral separates from the ligand too soon in the feed and in the rumen. The trace mineral may bind to an antagonist. Antagonists are minerals or compounds that reduce the availability of another mineral by forming a complex that reduces absorption by the animal. For beef and dairy cattle, this reaction typically occurs in the rumen. Antagonists can come from feedstuffs in the diet, soil contamination, or soil ingestion in drinking water. Common antagonists to the trace minerals that are consumed by cattle are sulfur, iron, and molybdenum. Trace minerals with bonds that are neither too weak nor too strong hold together in the feed and in the rumen and resist bonding to antagonists. This makes more trace minerals available to be absorbed in the small intestine. There are three main sources of trace minerals: inorganic trace minerals, organic trace minerals, and hydroxy trace minerals. Inorganic trace minerals have been in use since the 1930s and come in two main forms: oxides and sulfates. Oxides are held together with a combination of ionic and covalent bonds. They typically separate very slowly and do not consistently provide a desired level of trace mineral supplementation. Copper oxide is virtually unavailable, and zinc and manganese oxides are extremely variable in availability and purity. sulfates are held together with weak ionic bonds. These bonds separate easily, even in water. Sulfate trace minerals tend to break down early in the digestive process and may bind easily to antagonists, greatly reducing trace mineral absorption. Inorganic sulfate trace minerals are inexpensive and were the traditional choice for many years until technology brought new sources of trace minerals to market. Organic trace minerals came into use in the 1970s. Organic trace minerals are held together with a ligand that contains carbon by covalent bonds, which are stronger than ionic bonds found in inorganic sulfate trace minerals. Organic trace mineral molecules tend to stay together and resist binding to antagonists in the feed. Organic trace minerals are available in a variety of forms. Metal amino acid complexes, metal amino acid chelates, metal proteinates, metal polysaccharides. Each type may behave differently in the animal's digestive system and may vary in efficacy. Although they offer more nutritional advantages than inorganic trace minerals, organic trace minerals are expensive to feed, so they're often combined with inorganic trace minerals to control cost. The inorganic sources used in these organic combination programs still have the drawbacks we discussed earlier. The third source is hydroxy trace minerals. The newest and most technologically advanced form of trace mineral, hydroxy trace minerals, were developed and brought to market in the 2000s under the brand name IntelliBond. Hydroxy trace minerals are characterized by a covalent bond, like that found in organics, surrounded by a unique crystalline structure. This combination protects the mineral's molecular bonds in the feed and in the rumen, which minimizes binding to antagonists. This makes more trace minerals available at the right time during digestion to optimize absorption. Because they are less expensive than organics, hydroxy trace minerals can be used as the exclusive trace mineral in the feed. This eliminates the compromise of using inorganic trace minerals in cattle diets.
Chemical structure, basically we're talking about, that would be the chemical bonds and what they're bonded to. The structure, actual structure of the metals, it's going to be the same. It's just a matter of the bonds that are holding it together. In the case of sulfates, as we've talked, you've got a sulfate group, and it easily is removed from the metal in the presence of water. We have also, I haven't mentioned, but we have inorganic oxide sources. These are very tightly bound, and they're not water soluble, but they're also very slowly soluble in acid. So much of the oxides would go through the lower gut without becoming soluble. The hydroxy minerals, on the other hand, because of the crystalline structure of the hydroxy trace minerals and this covalent bonding with the hydroxy groups, it is gradually being released from the crystal molecule under acidic conditions.
Now let's take a look at how each source of trace mineral works in the feed and inside beef and dairy cattle. Inorganic sulfate trace minerals with their weak ionic bonds may begin to separate in the presence of moisture once they enter the feed. Free metal ions like copper and zinc may damage expensive feed ingredients like vitamins, live direct-fed microbials, and enzymes. And when a trace mineral separates from the ligand in the feed, it may be bound to an antagonist. When feed is exposed to moisture, water-soluble sulfates may leach away. Depending on the source, organic trace minerals may also be water-soluble, leaching away in the presence of moisture. With their strong bonds and crystalline structure, hydroxy trace minerals resist separating in feed and binding to antagonists. When exposed to water, hydroxy trace minerals have minimal leaching because they have very low water solubility. Hydroxy trace minerals also have a uniform particle size for easy mixing.
Here in Florida, we get a lot of rain, particularly in the summer. It'll probably rain almost every day somewhere close on this ranch during those 3 peak summer months. And what we found is that after a strong precipitation event, there was no preferential intake among the calves. They would consume all the supplements at the same rate, no preference. But on dry days, or days after several days of no rain, they would always consume the supplement with the hydroxychloride. And what we learned is that the rainfall was actually rinsing away, leaching away a lot of the metal from the sulfate and organic sources. And so we took that concept into the lab, and I worked with our soil chemist, Dr. Maria Silvera, and she set up a benchtop system to look at leaching of essential metals from these different formulations. And from that, we were able to find that just a rainfall of 2, 4, 6 inches that can easily occur over a 2-3 week period cumulatively has a dramatic impact on the amount of mineral that's lost from these free choice supplements. You can measure losses from all sources, but the amount of loss is much less from the hydroxychloride sources of copper, zinc, and manganese than sulfate and organic.
Now let's take a closer look at how each trace mineral source behaves in the animal's digestive tract. Once they enter the rumen, inorganic sulfate trace minerals continue to separate, increasing the chances of binding to an antagonist. The free metal ions can harm the beneficial microbes that populate the rumen, which can decrease fiber digestion, interfering with an important source of nutrients for the cow. Upsetting the rumen microbial balance may also lead to digestive and performance issues. Depending on the source and brand, organic trace minerals may vary in how much they separate in the rumen. The crystalline structure of hydroxy trace minerals helps them resist separation in the rumen. Hydroxy trace minerals are far less likely to affect rumen microbes or bind to antagonists compared to inorganic sulfate trace minerals.
If trace minerals become soluble too early in the digestive tract, there they can be reacting with various antagonists before you get down to the site where they're absorbed. And we want the mineral to get to the site where it can be absorbed in a form that, it can be absorbed. Microbes, their requirement for copper, zinc, and manganese is very low compared to what the animal requires. So we're basically providing these trace minerals for the most part for the animal. And microbes require small amounts, but research would indicate that the natural feed ingredients usually would contain adequate amounts of copper, zinc, and manganese to more than meet the requirement of the rumen microflora. So if we provide too high concentrations of minerals that are particularly converted to an ionic form in the rumen, they can have a negative effect on rumen fermentation. It's been shown that hydroxy trace minerals are not very soluble in the rumen. They're more or less inert in that they're not affecting bacteria the way that one would expect sulfate sources to.
As sulfate trace minerals enter the abomasum, those that are bound to an antagonist are likely to stay bound and are not available to be absorbed by the animal. At this stage, organic trace minerals begin separating more significantly than in the rumen. When hydroxy trace minerals enter the abomasum, the crystalline structure begins to shed its outer layers. Trace mineral absorption takes place in the small intestine. In order to be absorbed, the trace mineral must be separated from the ligand. In the small intestine, any trace mineral bound to an antagonist will not be absorbed. Ligands are absorbed through their own pathways, while the trace mineral is absorbed by specific transporters for use by the animal. In the small intestine, most of the hydroxy trace minerals are available for absorption, maximizing bioavailability.
Most of the trace mineral absorption, particularly for zinc, copper, and manganese, occurs in the small intestine. And it involves specific transporters that bind the metal and put it into the small intestine, mucosa. Then there are also transporters that transport it out of the intestine into the bloodstream. And so these metals, the mineral needs to be in a soluble form at the site of absorption for these transporters to be able to remove it. If it's insoluble, tightly bound to an antagonist, or if it's bound to a organic or chelate that's too tightly bound, it would not become available. These transporters would have to have that metal in a free form that they could remove to transport it. If trace minerals become soluble too early in the digestive tract, there they can be reacting with various antagonists before you get down to the site where they're absorbed. And we want the mineral to get to the site where it can be absorbed in a form that it can be absorbed. The hydroxy trace minerals are, based on the data, solubilized at a slower rate, even in the the stomach and upper part of the small intestine.
Trace minerals are vital to the productivity and proper immune function of your cattle. As you consider the role of trace minerals in your nutritional program, keep in mind that different sources of trace minerals can impact productivity of your cattle. If you'd like to learn more about the advantages of hydroxy trace minerals for your dairy or beef operation, contact your IntelliBond representative or visit our website.